Hey, good morning, everyone. It's currently 9 o'clock. I want to welcome everyone to the State Water Resources Control Board Drinking Water and Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program Fee Stakeholder Meeting. We will get started in about 2 minutes. Let's give a little extra time for others to join us. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for the State Water Resources Control Board's Drinking Water and Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program Fee Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through the Zoom and webcast platforms and is also being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I'm the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Today, we have many fee and revenue branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure this meeting runs as smoothly as possible. If any time throughout this event you find that you're having technical difficulties, please email us. And the email is on the agenda. It's currently on the screen. It's das-drinkingwaterfees@waterboards.ca.gov. Also joining us today is John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. Assisting me today with this presentation from the Fee and Revenue Branch is Cassandra White. Individuals attending via Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you would like to ask a question or provide a comment. If you're joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or a question by emailing the email, of course, on the screen. And then staff will then we'll be taking those questions in order as we receive them. In the past, there has been some delays in the broadcast through the webcast. Therefore, through the meeting, staff may pause so the broadcast can catch up to the listeners. Again, we thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to this 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So I just want to go over a few meeting guidelines. One, remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you don't have the handouts, don't worry. We'll be sharing the documents on the screen, and you can request a copy of documents after the meeting, or the handouts are posted on the Water Board's fee webpage. Remember, again, if you have any technical difficulties, please email us and staff will help you. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Remember, again, you can submit comments and questions using the email. And then finally, for the meeting to run efficiently and stay on track, we're requesting each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have a clarifying question to your original question, and that's acceptable. Once your question is fully answered, we're going to move to the next participant's question, and you'll be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, we respect all opinions and input. However, if the discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is, of course, to discuss drinking water and ELAP fees, then I'm going to ask that the participants and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve appropriate staff. So at this time, I'm going to review the agenda. Item number 2 on the agenda is the fund condition. We're just going to, if you can keep the agenda up, thank you. We're going to go over the safe drinking water account fund condition. We're going to talk about the cost drivers for the safe drinking water account. There's a couple of BCPs there that have some impact to the account. And then we're going to move into the ELAP, and we'll go over which is attachment 3, item 4, which is the ELAP budget fund condition. Item 5 is the ELAP budget cost drivers, which is attachment 4. We're going to have item 6. We'll have some discussions on ELAP's fee proposals for fiscal year 23-24. And then we're going to talk about ELAP's regulation updates. And then we'll have an open discussion. And then finally, the next steps, which are driving to our board meeting on September 19th. So before we go ahead and, of course, dive into today's meeting, I just want to introduce John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services, and have him provide an opening statement.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I'll be brief. I just want to once again thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to attend these meetings, both this one and the ones that we've had in the past and the ones we'll have in the future. I know everybody's busy, but it really is important to us to get your input. All of the input that we received today, we do pass it on to our board members so that they can make a more informed decision in September when they actually set the fees. So again, I just want to say thank you for attending today. And then if you have any questions or anything that you need clarification on outside of this meeting, feel free to contact David or myself or Cassandra or Justin or one of the other staff people, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thanks, David.
Thank you, John. So let's go ahead and move into item 2. And again, the first part of the today's meeting is related to our drinking water program and our drinking water fees. I just want to highlight here the fund condition of the safe drinking water account. For those that may not be familiar, the safe drinking water account is the account that helps support, fund our drinking water activities at the water board. All revenues are deposited into this account. And this is where we're tracking our revenues and our expenditures. Just want to, again, highlight where we're at right now. Of course, in our accounting process, we have not officially closed the books and finalized the books for fiscal year 2023. Our accounting staff is working towards that. With that said, we have reports now that we use that help assist us in putting together projections for both our revenues and expenditures. And so looking at our current year projected fiscal year 22-23, we're looking at our total revenues of about $40.8 million and total expenditures of roughly around 39 million. And I just want to state that again, these are still projections, but what this does is basically it's an ending balance of 2.8 million, and expenditures are exceeding revenues. Apologies. Revenues are exceeding expenditures by about $1.7 million there. So it drives the fund down to about up by about 7.3%. And so moving forward, and we do have cost drivers that we're going to discuss here. But if we don't do any fee increase, basically, what happens here is that the reserve draws down under 2%. But more or less what I'm really concerned about is the structural deficit. So our revenues fall short of our expenditures by about $2 million. And so the concern there is, of course, moving forward, if we don't adjust for that, then at some point in future years, we're going to need to raise fees to cover that $2 million. And I've kind of mentioned in our other programs, and of course, in the past, that, you know, there's of course an unknown. We don't know what's going to hit the fund in 24, 25, or any of the future years. And I wouldn't want to have to raise fees for that, but also go back and have to make up that $2 million. And so looking at that, what we're looking at needing right now is about 5.5% of additional revenue, which basically equates to a fee increase of 5.5%. What this does is basically, you know, generates about 43 million in revenue. Our expenditures are sitting about 43 million. If you look at, again, the structural deficit, or the structural comparison between revenues and expenditures, it begins to balance itself out, which is what I'm really trying to drive towards, and keeps things, of course, balanced. When we started this process back in March, and we had our first stakeholder meeting, we were looking at about a 6.5% increase in needed revenue, which would basically be about a 6.5% increase to the drinking water program. But through looking at, of course, expenditures, revenues for 22-23, we've been able to kind of adjust that and lower it down to 5.5%. And most of this is basically just covering, again, and we'll go over the cost drivers, but of course, our, you know, costs for the program have gone up, meaning just our normal employee compensation, pro rata, and of course, there's of course a couple slight BCPs that they're making adjustments to the account. And what we are proposing when we talk about a 5% increase, so we'd be looking at all the categories in the drinking water program and adjusting those. So each calculation and category would go up by 5.5%. This is consistent with what we've done in the past. And of course, you know, this is staff's proposal as we get into briefing the board members and going over it. If the board, you know, wants to go in a different route, you know, we'll adjust based off of that. So are there any questions at this time regarding the Safe Drinking Water account? Hey, good morning, Amber. You have your hand up.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much, David, for this great presentation. I understand the need for capturing that revenue. My name is Amber Baylor. I am the Director of Environmental Compliance for the South Orange County Wastewater Authority. It sounded like you're going to talk about how you're adjusting for new personnel as far as the budget change proposals to be able to cover that loss in revenue. Is that what I hear from?
Yeah, exactly. We'll go over. We'll move to the budget cost drivers right now, let's move to that right now. So item number 3, and I'll have Cassandra go over. And just at a high level, when you look at the top column there, our fee setting budget was 39.5 million in 22-23, and then the enacted budget is 42.9. So it's a difference of $3 million. So the cost of the program has gone up 3.3 million, which is about an 8.4% change. So not to take everything away from Cassandra, but Cassandra, I'll move it to you so you can go ahead and kind of finish this presentation of the budget cost drivers here.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. So as David already went over those numbers, we see that there's a difference about 8.4%. So I'll get into what's driving those costs. And just note that there were no change in the cost drivers from the June stakeholder meeting. But the first cost driver is state operation. Its increase of nearly 3.1 million And it's primarily made up of employee compensation, salaries, healthcare, and retirement. The next cost driver category is BCPs. And the first one is the BCP. It's a spending authority termination due to the expiration of the fiscal year 1920 microplastics BCP. And it was a BCP that performed testing in drinking water, and it expired June 30, 2022. But as a result of that termination, there was a $175,000 savings to the Safe Drinking Water account and about 0.4% that was returned to that account. The next two BCPs, they were introduced during the May revised budget. So the first one is the fiscal year 23-24 lead and copper rule revision regulation, implementation, and database. And it's also a spending authority reduction of $486,000, 1.2%. And the purpose of the BCP is the implementation of the fiscal year 22-23 lead and copper rule revision and regulatory development BCP. The implementation calls for a reduction of the original Safe Drinking Water account appropriation from $942,000 to $456,000. And the $486,000 reduction is now allocated to the federal trust fund. And then the last BCP, it is the fiscal year 23-24 Division of Administrative Services Support BCP, which provides $2.3 million in continuous funding from various special funds for 15 permanent positions. And the Safe Drinking Water portion is $214,000, about 0.5%. The BCP provides resources to be used to address increased administrative workload due to rapid and evolving program growth, increased resource management and tracking workload, and reporting requirements for the Division of Administrative Services. And as always, if you'd like more information on any of the BCPs, you can go to the Department of Finance, and a link has been provided for these last two BCPs. And then the last category is pro rata. Again, there was no change from June, and it is an increase of $730,000 or 1.8%. And so again, just to wrap up, overall, there was an increase of $3.3 million to the Safe Drinking Water account that came in at 8.4%. Are there any questions on the cost drivers?
So let me just add something before we get back to Amber's questions here. So the budget, of course, for the drinking water program has gone up by 8.4%, basically 3.3 million. And of course, the budget cost drivers are kind of wrapped up of what goes into that 3.3 million. However, we're needing to generate this basically $3.3 million in revenue. We need roughly an increase in fees by 5.5%. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people ask, well, why is it 8.4? Well, it just depends on how the fee structure, our fee structure for this program is it's not, none of it's flat fees, right? It's there's different calculations in each category based on, of course, volume and size and things like that. So we're needing a 5.5% increase in fees generates the 3.3 million. Now, again, looking at the cost drivers for the Division of Drinking Water or the State Water Drinking Water Program as a whole, there's no new additional positions being added. When you look at state operation costs, that's just the cost of existing positions going up, basically. And again, is when you look at and then all these costs are out of our control. Of course, this goes from the Department of Finance and things like that when it comes to employee compensation and retirement, healthcare costs. But this is the portion that the water board has to pay. And when we talk about adding any additional positions, of course, they didn't go to the water, they didn't go to the division to the drinking water program at the water boards. But when you look at that last BCP, the Administrative Services Support BCP, there were some positions added to the Division of Administrative Services for administrative support. All funds went towards paying into that. And if you listen to any of our meetings yesterday, the water rights program and of course the water quality program took shares, and of course the waste discharge permit fund and funds like the underground storage tank cleanup fund, because those are larger funds. They take a lot of larger increases. I think if I don't quote me on this, but I think the WDPF yesterday took almost a $900,000 increase towards the towards administrative service BCP. So let me get back. So Amber, you have your hand raised, and I think you had a couple of questions here.
I did. David, you answered one of them just as it relates to no new positions on your state operations line item 1 there. However, have there been any talks about reduction of positions over time? Because we've seen some fees increasing quite rapidly over time. And as a management personnel, we're already asked on our board on reductions of positions. So just wondered if there was those kind of conversations happening.
I know Darren, I don't think Darren's online right now. The program is always, oh, well, Darren, do you want to help answer this, or I could chime in, or?
Yeah, no, I can help answer it. So Amber, the last time we did a base workload analysis, we were understaffed by about 50 positions, and actually in order to meet our federal workload standards. So for instance, our biggest driver is sanitary surveys. We're supposed to have 100% of them done every 3 years. Right now, we're only accomplishing about 76% of that workload. So we have not looked at reducing staff since we're technically understaffed at the moment, according to the metrics we track on that. We did, though, however, on that one BCP, move the $486,000 reduction there is moving 2 staff positions that previously were on this fee over to the federal funds, since those are available. So we took every advantage we can to try to move staff to federal funding when it's available. But I will note that currently Congress is moving to appropriate more earmark funds, taking it out of the SRF, and we get a portion of the SRF set aside for our staffing, and that has jeopardized that future funding. Right now, the bill funding is compensating for that, but at the expiration of the bill, there's the potential that the federal funding, if they keep doing the congressional directed spendings or the earmarks the way they're going, that we could have to drastically increase our fees to make up for the loss of federal funding. But that's 3 years out at the moment. So we'll see how that shapes up.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that question. On that base workload analysis, is that something that we can actually see, or just, I think there's a lot of questions from our members just as it relates to a constant increase in fees. So they're trying to, I work for a lot of engineers, so we're trying, love to see the math behind it all. So if there's anything that could be shared, that would be very helpful, understanding that you all are on a staff deficit. So that's kind of my first question. And I guess the next question is, David had mentioned that there was kind of a flat rate increase across each one of the programs. Has there been any discussion related to kind of shifting those percentages across different programs as it relates to some of the legislative underpinnings of each one of those programs? Or is it just been more from a simplicity sake that you can apply a 5.5% across the board?
That's you, David.
Yeah. So more the latter, Amber. We're looking more at a simple process of assessing each category equally to 5.5%. We think this makes equally with the quality purposes. Kind of each category has its own share. Definitely, we recognize the larger fee payers, pay more, but of course they have more service connections and so forth. And on some of the smaller fees, a 5.5% increase is about $16. And so we look at it, and we propose this to the board. If the board makes a decision, though, don't raise maybe some of the smaller fees, then we'll definitely take that into consideration and make those adjustments.
Thank you. Helpful.
So are there any other questions on whether the cost drivers or the fund condition? Again, this just kind of recapping. This is basically kind of end of the presentation for the drinking water side of the program here. When it comes to, of course, when it comes to the safe drinking water account, we are looking at needing about a 5.5% increase in revenue, which basically translates into an increase of 5.5% on fees. At this point, staff is recommending that we raise each category by 5.5% to generate this revenue. Next steps, and we'll get into this a little further, but we start going into the briefing portion with our board members, and we appreciate everything we hear at these meetings, because of course we relay that information to our board members so they can make an informed decision moving forward. We start to put together our agenda item and staff report, which comes out roughly 10 days before the board meeting, which is September 19th, and then allows public comment to take place after that. So I'm not seeing anything, and so we are now going to move into ELAP, which I believe is item number 4. Thank you. And so briefly, I would want to talk about the state of the Environmental Laboratory Improvement Fund, known as ELIF. And so ELIF is the fund that helps support the staffing, and it's also the fund where we track the revenues and expenditures. Again, I just want to state that, first of all, that accounting office does not close the books for fiscal year 22-23. These are projections, but we're in a better position in our projections than we've had in the last few years, because now we have more updated reports as our agency has implemented fiscal. One thing right off the bat, for 22-23, as many of you may know, we did not increase fees for ELAP, and by doing we took measures to minimize our expenditures, and basically what took place where there were roughly about 3 positions that were charging to another funding source, and then 2 positions that were held vacant. And so by doing that, we were able to minimize and of course reduce our expenditures, and knowing that we were projecting that our revenues were going to come in lower than anticipated. And so now that we've basically gone through the fiscal year, and we're looking at revenues, our revenues have actually, of course, exceeded our expenditures by about almost $900,000, $867,000. There was a fines and penalty revenue of $267,000 that came in, which was deposited into the fund, and so that helps builds up revenues. So when you're looking at 22-23, our ending balance is ending basically about 26, almost 27%. So we basically achieved what we wanted to do. Basically, not only did we cover expenditures, but there's additional revenue, which is assisting us in our next approach as we're moving forward into 23-24. And so, of course, if you look at 23-24, if we didn't do anything, of course, the ending fund reserve would fall into the negative by about 17%. So we'll go into the red there. And so when we were looking at back in May, and we presented this, we're looking at needing about a 56% increase. But because we have now some reserve and we're able to draw that down, we're projecting needing about 30% of additional revenue, which basically, again, translates to about a 30% fee increase. And we'll talk about that here in a moment, to cover our existing expenditures and in with a positive fund reserve. And so basically what we're proposing, staff is, at this time moving into 23-24, is a 30% increase in each of the existing categories and under the existing fee structure, right? So the base fee, the field accreditation fees, the assessment fees, of course, the fees for the outside labs in California. So we would be looking at adjusting those fees by 30%. So before I get into a little more of that detail, though, let's move to the next slide here, which shows the cost drivers. And this is important to note that our cost drivers have actually slightly gone down. So this is also helping the fund where there weren't large increases into the fund's budget. And I'll move this to Cassandra so she can highlight this.
Okay, thank you. So our first table shows last year's fee setting budget of $4.7 million, followed by the enacted budget for fiscal year 23-24 of $4.6 million. And as David mentioned, it decreased slightly by $85,000 or 1.8%. And the second table shows what's driving that cost. And again, no change from the June stakeholder meeting. First one is state operation. It was a slight increase of $11,000 at just 0.2% increase. And again, primarily employee compensation, salaries, healthcare, and retirement. And the last one was pro rata, and it decreased $96,000 for a 2% decrease. And that is the overview for the ELAP cost drivers. I'll send it back to David.
So basically, the cost drivers have gone down by $85,000. I think I mentioned this a couple years ago. The Department of Finance had set the pro rata for ELAP at a higher rate than originally calculated at, and so over the last couple of years they've been adjusting that. And so last year there was a negative difference, and then of course this year there's also a net negative difference, which again, based off of that, and then the state ops in this program not increasing a whole bunch, basically maintaining about the same level. The fund, of course, has gone down from what we set fees last year at 4.7 to about 4.6, and again about an $85,000 difference. And as I mentioned in the cost drivers, in the fund condition, of course, because again, we took the measures to be able to hold expenditures down, and revenue is higher than what we originally projected. We've been able, and adding in a fines and penalty revenue. Revenue, of course, is projected a little higher than what we did kind of at the beginning of the year, and of course, higher than what we were discussing back in June. And so by us being able to we're able to use some of that revenue to help drive the reserve down and offset costs for fiscal year 23-24, which is somewhat of, and we'll get into this, somewhat of maybe of a transition year for us when we're looking at the fee structure. And as I mentioned in June, we're looking at needing 56% of revenue, but because we can offset that with the fund reserve, we're now looking at needing about 30% in revenue. which again is about a 30% increase. And so let's move to the next item here. And maybe we don't actually have a slide. I was hoping maybe we just go back to the agenda here. Okay, so you know, we've just slightly talked about, of course, you know, our need for the fee increases, and what staff is proposing, of course, is you know, a 30% increase to each category. And I kind of mentioned earlier some of the, of course, the categories of the base fee, field accreditation, assessment fees, but we're also working at and looking at updates to the 24-25 fee structure. And you know, we've determined, and I'm going to have Christine jump in here in a moment here, but you know, we've determined that both ELAP and the laboratories lack required infrastructure and data to add a volume-based fee to the structure for fiscal year 23-24. As many of you that have been joining us, we've had a couple of meetings or had a meeting, and of course, a couple of emails have gone up, and there's been some discussion about moving to a volume-based fee. So again, that's why we're recommending that the state board at September meeting, that our fees are kind of raised in the same manner they've been in the past, a flat percentage increase to all existing fee components, which right now is looking at about a 30% increase. And that we continue, that we're going to work over the next year on restructuring that effort. If the board accepts our recommendation, the fee increase will go into effect, and it'll likely, you know, be put into regulations by kind of end of the October timeframe. And you know, one of the biggest hurdles to adding the volume-based charge to our fee structure is, of course, the current lack of data on the number of regulatory samples being run by ELAP accredited laboratories. To remedy this, you know, we're proposing to add new language to our ELAP regulations during the state board's regulatory fee setting process, which of course would be adopted in September. So what we're going to talk about this right now in item 7, but not only is staff for the board for in September going to take a fee structure to the board that's going to include a flat fee of 30%, we're also going to build in language to our fee structure on reporting requirements. And so let me have Christine jump in, and if you want to talk a little bit about the reporting requirements and what the language would state that we would be proposing to our board in September.
Okay, thank you so much, David. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you may need to turn your volume up or get closer to the mic.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I'm going to hand this over to Jen McLaren and Kate Hopefully to talk about the draft reporting requirements language and our new initiative to work on a different fee structure based on volume. So let me hand it over to the ELAP team.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen McLaren. I work here in the Program Development, Research, and Enforcement Unit at ELAP. So I just wanted to give a quick background on how we got to kind of where we are now. So we were instructed by the board to develop an alternative fee structure to fund ELAP. Regulations require the program to be funded entirely by the laboratory community, and the board encouraged ELAP to pursue a volume-based model similar to several other water boards programs. ELAP has held a meeting with a work group that represented a large number of laboratory community members. The volume-based idea has been relatively well received by our stakeholder working group, where different fee structure ideas and implementation strategies were discussed. We're looking at other possible alternative fee structures, and we also strongly recommend exploring state agency partners help pay their fair share to support ELAP. But currently, because of how short on time we are, we anticipate recommending a flat fee increase for next year, as we've done in previous years, while we determine the best implementation strategy for the new volume model to potentially adopt in fall of 24. Both ELAP and our laboratories don't have the infrastructure and data required to add the new volume charge this year, but we will continue working on developing the structure and clearing some of the hurdles. And as David mentioned, one of the hurdles is the lack of information on the numbers of regulatory tests run by the California laboratory community. So to address this issue, we're proposing the inclusion of tracking and reporting requirement language in the emergency regulations this year to be effective April 30th of 2024. Tracking of regulatory samples is already required under the new TNI regulations that are effective in January of 24. And therefore, ELAP doesn't believe this new requirement to report the information to ELAP quarterly will be a major hardship for the laboratory community. And the specific regulation language is up on the screen right now, and it was sent to our work group members, and it will also be sent out to the ELAP email subscribers list soon after this meeting. And ELAP is requesting comments from the laboratory community be emailed to us by August 15th to our elapca_comments@waterboards.ca.gov email address. And then ELAP will review these comments and make any necessary adjustments to the regulation language. And those updated regulatory language adjustments will be presented at the August 22nd LTAC meeting. I'm happy to take any questions.
Amber, I think you're up first.
I think Peter actually had his hand raised before me, actually.
Okay, Peter, we'll take. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Peter Arth from Enthalpy Analytical. I actually have a question going back a little bit, David, to the original budget slide that you had. It showed that the incoming fees, absent of the 30% increase, had gone down almost $800,000 from 22 to 23. Do you know what the driver behind that is?
Can we go back to that slide?
I apologize for going backwards, but
hey, no problem.
It's going to relate to the next question I have, I promise.
And I can take that one, David, if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead. I think I know the answer, but go ahead, Jen.
Yeah. Well, I think, hi, Peter, good morning. It's a great question, and it's kind of twofold. We talked about it in the stakeholder meeting. One of the contributing factors is the decline in laboratory population. So we're losing labs, and right now it's a zero-sum game the way our fees are required to be collected. So when we lose labs, the labs who remain have to absorb the fees that they would have paid. So it raises fees for everybody else. We've also seen, some adjustments in the amount of FOAs that folks are being accredited for, though not quite as much. That's not a huge factor. The other factor that is a big contributor is that many more laboratories than we expected to use third parties are using third parties. So, based on kind of the comments that we had received during the regulations development period, we anticipate, I think our projection was that an additional 10% on top of the 45% of labs that were required to use third parties would go out. But actually it's been a much, much higher percentage of that than we thought. So right now we have about 25% of the assessments, and third parties are getting about 75%. So that is a huge, that's a major loss of revenue that we weren't anticipating.
Yeah, and that all is understandable. And I've sort of seen that progression over the last 2 years. So I guess my next question then is, if fewer labs are being accredited or using ELAP services for accreditation, I'm wondering if you could add a little color to then why the operations budget has increased almost $1.5 million from 1 year to the next. So if there are fewer labs that are in and less effort for accreditation, I'm wondering where the cost increases and cost drivers are coming from.
So Peter, let me take that. So what you're seeing here on the screen of that $3.2 million, which shows expenditures, and then it looks like that then in the following year in 23-24, which the budget is $4.6 million. What the 3.2 is an actual expenditure, right? And so because we were able to hold 5 positions, charge different funding sources, and look at keeping a couple positions vacant. We had huge savings there. So that's the actual expenditure. If we go up to, I guess down, let's go to attachment 4. So do you see the 22-23 fee setting budget? That was the budget. So the budget for last year, or the year, the year that we're in, it was really 4.7 million, but we didn't fully charge to that, right? Because we, again, took some measures to hold positions vacant, to charge other funding sources, which then really adjusted our actual expenditures. What we're projecting a lot less than that, right? So we didn't really, our operations didn't go up. We're still, we have 25 positions in the program that hasn't been augmented. The 25 positions cost 4.7 million in 22-23, and it's slightly less in 23-24, just based on, of course, really a pro rata adjustment. It's basically remained the same.
Okay, I think I follow where you're going with that. So you're saying that in 22-23, by not having positions filled, or by funding those positions through alternate means, you were able to exercise a cost savings within that year. Is that
That's exactly correct. We didn't charge what the expenditures to the Environmental Laboratory Improvement Fund, right? So those expenditures didn't hit the fund. They hit other funds, and or, as you just mentioned, a couple of positions were just held vacant. So those positions didn't charge. As a result, we're showing now what we're projecting the fund to end at, right? And expenditures of 22-23, which were a lot less than what we were budgeted for.
Okay, and then I guess my last question, I'll let Amber go next, is there a concern that part of the reason why laboratories are dropping out of the program is because of fee increases? And if so, how do you envision this projecting forward multiple years down the road if laboratories are continuing to exit the program because of significant 30% fee increases or a new structure, and then the remaining laboratories of this gen just going to have to cover continually higher and higher fees, thus snowballing the effect down the road? So I don't, again, I'm not fully aware of what the drivers are for labs leaving the program, but if these are part of it, can you sort of add a little color as to how the board is looking at that?
Yeah, I can take that one, Dave. Yeah, Peter, that became a concern for us about a year ago, and because just exactly what the situation is that you're talking about, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a snowball effect and kind of a destabilization on the industry based on the way that fees are set up. So we went and started working with the board's economist to get an idea of what was going on, and did some analysis with him, provided data over the last 8 years or so since we came to the board, and he does not see any reason for concern at this point that the industry will be destabilized in any way. We will continue to work with him just to make sure that those checks are there. But at this time, we're not worried about the laboratory population, dropping to a point where there's not capacity for the testing. All the regulatory testing that's required by regulators in the state is being performed by the number of labs that we have right now.
Okay.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, thanks for the great conversation today. So I think one of the questions that Peter had, and maybe not, I didn't maybe fully understand, is as you're saying that there's less assessments that are being done by ELAP staff, what is the staff then now doing? Because as a fee for service business, as the revenues are going down, I'm just trying to understand that piece. And then I have a follow-up question after that.
Yeah, good question, logical question. So I will point out first that we're not a fee for service program. That's not how the fees are structured or designed to be collected based on time accounting or task accounting. I will point out a few things. One of those being that, as the program grew at the Department of Public Health, we did not add positions. The fees were not raised on most of the laboratories for over a decade, and they were able to do that because they could charge the T&I labs a significant more amount when we were offering that accreditation. And there was also some supplemental monies coming from general fund at CDPH. So that's why the fees stayed lower. We did not have the staff at that time to perform the task that we were meant to. I think, anecdotally, you all know that ELAP was 2 years behind in assessments and sending out rollover certificates and not even looking at PTs. So that was, a big task for us has been actually getting ELAP to a point where we're performing the task that we're supposed to be performing based on what's required of us. So that was one point, and the second one just slipped out of my mind. We were talking about assessments and what they're doing, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I mean, being understaffed for quite some time and then getting more at a staffing level is definitely, helpful.
Yeah, and one of the newer tasks that these folks are doing now that we weren't performing before is oversight of the third parties. Like that has been a higher task, a higher workload than anticipated, just because more of the folks are going out, more of the labs are going out than anticipated. So the workload has kind of shifted a bit there too.
Okay. Yeah, no, very helpful. It's very, I'm a process person, so I appreciate the inside look and understanding from a management perspective. So I'm going to switch over my comments, and this is directed to Jen. Maybe we could go back to the slide as it relates to the potential regulations for that ELAP is proposing in the emergency fee structure. So that was the last slide that you all had. And my question is really trying to understand what steps ELAP has taken to be able to count the different fee structures, because I'm just going to be kind of forthright. Whenever I saw this draft reporting requirement language, I was a little bit taken back. As a public utility laboratory, all of our data is actually publicly inaccessible. And throughout the process, there was kind of a push that state agency partners were reviewing all of the regulatory required data and wanted to make sure that they had data that was of high quality. So it made me think that there is essentially a database or a combination of databases that are being reviewed by the state agency partners. Thereby, a script or some type of counting logic could be applied from a methodology perspective, whereby you could actually count these things. So I'm a little bit trying to understand why the burden of counting regulatory tests has been proposed to shift towards the regulated community, and what steps the internal staff at ELAP has taken to actually put together or assess a methodology. Yeah. So that's kind of the question that I have.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is there are a couple different databases that the different regulatory tests end up in. So there's that complexity. But like, for example, all the drinking water data ends up in CLIP. But a lot of laboratories perform extra testing, or they report additional analytes. And the way the database is set up, it doesn't record which tests were required for regulatory purposes and which data is extra on top of that. So there's no way for us to figure out specifically which tests were regulatory tests and which tests were just additional data that the lab had, which they provided. And so we really don't want to punish labs. Like if we take the whole volume sample of all of the data in CLIP, we don't want to be punishing or charging labs extra for providing additional data. We want to make sure that our state programs have access to that data, because it is helpful even if it's not required. And then also things like our microdata is not recorded in any database. So there's that complexity. And then some of the other databases are not set up to record which lab is reporting which data. The data just kind of comes in. So there's a lot of computational factors that are complex. And so this will be much more specific to per test help us assess, what labs are running specifically for regulatory requirements.
So I have kind of like another process questions, and thank you for letting me know that. I guess my first question is, when you looked at that analysis, maybe just did you take a sample from either CWIX or CLIP to understand what those differences were as a percentage? Okay, what was the result of that?
So basically, I took 3 months of data from CLIP, just everything that came into CLIP over 3 months, and kind of just tallied up what our totals were and try to start working that way. I mean, it's a lot of data. It crashed my laptop several times, so it's a lot to try and to compute. So that was kind of the process. But as things tend to go, you know, the more you look, the more you realize how much you don't have all the little pieces of information that you need to really do a good job estimating what numbers are.
And if I could also jump in too, I want to point out that while, you know, most of us in this meeting here are thinking about drinking water and, you know, wastewater analyses, there are over a dozen state agencies that require ELAP use for data that they receive, and they're not all under the Cali PA umbrella. So even if we could, you know, wrangle all of the agencies within our building and get some sort of information technology solution that we could, you know, bring together and do that analysis, it would be a very hard task to make that happen for the agencies that are outside of Cali PA. One of the kind of areas that is most challenging for us is hazardous waste analyses, and, you know, tracking where the use or where the data is going, who the end user of the data is. Oftentimes, I think even laboratories are unsure of whether or not data they're producing is going to regulatory agencies or DTSC in those situations. And so, you know, it's a combination of what we can do internally with our partners and what the, you know, information that the laboratory has or doesn't have about the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I definitely.
Like, this is a starting point for us, you know, like we need to understand the world of what's going on out there. We have a good idea, a great idea of what's happening with drinking water, so with wastewater, hazardous waste. We don't truly know what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll just be quite frank in this discussion, and it'll be a part of the kind of public comments. I definitely object to having my lab manager count tests for a changing regulatory fee structure. They have enough on their plate, especially with adoption of the T&I regulations. And so I think that this is an overly burdensome request. I would prefer that this, because of all the complexities that you laid out, Caitlin, on understanding kind of the scope of the volumes, that this process be pushed into LTAC, where the technologists can actually go through and have a structured methodology. I mean, some back and forth that we've had in the lab community has related to, you know, what about the tests that we're performing on process control versus, you know, what we're doing for reporting purposes. And then, you know, when a commercial laboratory is performing these analyses for that, is the commercial laboratory also accountable for counting these tests and then reporting to you all? So is there a double accounting? So I think maybe stepping back, understanding that the, you know, water board had requested, you know, this volume-based system. To me, there are so many, the regulations, the draft regulations, as I say, it's so vague at this point that I think maybe a better structured approach is to putting it through LTAC. And I think that the board could support that, just so that we could get on the same page on helping you all. We want to be partners with you all, but for us, it's going to be a big lift. And even in April, I mean, we're just getting under our feet with being with T&I as of January, and it just seems too fast at this point. Understanding you all need a solution, but I think that the board could also realize that maybe we could take a step back and work with you all over the next year to formulate a better solution. So that's kind of my comments here.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Amber. Thank you.
Debbie. Oh, I'm sorry, Caitlin. You had
No, I just wanted to let Amber know that we are going to be bringing this to LTAC in the August meeting. And also just to say, you know, if you didn't catch the May board meeting and you weren't in kind of the initial meeting with the fee group that we had, you know, I wanted to point out that the philosophy behind what we're doing here and the philosophy that behind what the board wants us to do is really directed at supporting the small laboratories who are not performing a high volume of, you know, regulatory tests. It's essentially, this system is designed, or the intent behind it is to shift the fee burden to the higher producers in a way. So we can definitely talk more about that too offline if you want, Amber, but I wanted to make sure everybody here knows the intent behind adding a volume-based charge to the fees, and totally agree with you. We can't do it on a short-term basis. That's why we're planning on working with LTAC and that fee focus group that we have over the next year.
Yeah, hopefully that can shift there instead of an actual mandate through a draft regulation, which will require us to do that. So thank you for having that. And I just want to say the focus, the way this reads also is for the regulatory community. So this shifts the burden from commercial side back to the public side. So just trying to kind of also say that as another caveat within this discussion.
That's a really helpful perspective. Thank you.
So good morning, Debbie. I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thank you, David, and everybody else. Appreciate the presentation this morning, and also the harder look at the numbers. It's encouraging in some ways to go down from 58% down to 30%. But I do have some questions on the numbers, and really it's on that fund balance, our fund condition sheet on there. But I want to start out maybe by asking Caitlin, you had said there was areas that, you gave kind of percentages as to what was going on with third-party assessments, but I was wondering what you were estimating with also laboratory decline.
Yeah, well, so in the board meeting in May, we presented a graph that showed that we have lost, a pretty steady percentage of laboratories since we came to the board in 2015. We did see a slight jump from, I think the average before the regs were adopted was about 4% per year to about a 6% after the regulations were adopted. We are expecting a bit of a jump in 2024 because we've heard from you all that there are laboratories who are, hanging on to their accreditation until TNI is required and then plan to relinquish at that point. So we're expecting a slight jump next year. After that, we expect it to kind of even back out and, hopefully flatten out, potentially go back to, just a slower decline.
To understand that more, like when you say percent loss, are you looking at, you said you jumped to 6, are you estimating 10%? Are you estimating 20%? It's
not, no, I would not guess over 10%. And this is just, let me be clear, this is a guess based on the trends that we've seen. 10% to me would be high. I think we may go back to, 6 or 7% like we saw after the regulations were adopted. I wouldn't expect too much more than that personally.
Okay. And I was really going to looking at your regulatory fees and seeing kind of what went into that, which is about a 20% change. And so you're assuming, but based upon what I heard you say, then it's probably that 7 to 10%-ish in labs dropped, then what did you say, about 20, 50, 30%, maybe 30% in on-site assessments, and then a little bit of an FOA adjustments. Is that what went into the estimate? Okay, so this is a question for you, David, actually kind of for all of you guys. So in looking at what, your 4.3%, that is I'm assuming that assumes that you're fully staffed at that point, versus that you would keep, you would be asked, you would actually fill the positions that weren't filled before, which I think was 2 or 3 positions. Is that correct? Correct.
So yes, under the state operations, we see the $4.3 million. That's supporting all 25 positions.
Okay.
So we would not. This is under that we're not going to fund them with other funding sources or keep positions vacant. We're trying to get to where ELAP has all the resources available to them.
Okay. But yet let me ask you that, is that something that's under board discretion? I know when we looked at other areas, we talked about, let's not fill those. And we just talked about, we just talked about, hey, we're losing labs. We're doing a little less. We're shifting some of our priorities but the option to not fill them at least over the next year as we try to get a better understanding. Is that an option that the board has?
Well, I can't speak for the board, but yes, the board could direct Darren to say, can those positions be, if there are some vacancies, can they be held vacant for some savings? Department of Finance does, want to know, we have to report to the Department of Finance on our positions and, why we're not hiring. So we do have to report to Finance on that also. But yes, the board could direct us, that'd be kind of, part of the kind of internal discussions that'll take place.
Okay. I'd encourage that, given the rest of the discussions that we've had about why there is that, and knowing that you don't want to get rid of them at least till we get a area that's flattened out, but also, knowing the need part. And then, sorry, I know Peter,
if I can interject just quickly on that question. So there's been some of that in the past. It is, however, contrary to state law. By state law, we are to fund the full position allocation given to us by the legislature in order to perform our duties. So it's not without risk of taking that step. And we obviously have done it some in the past, but we don't take it as a light step to basically subvert law. As you know, that could be a bit of a slippery slope when it comes to many things.
I understand it. I understand that. And then I guess my last, not my last, but I want Peter to be able to go too again, but just a comment of the just going 30% straight across the board. I think given that, and then how that's going to end up translating, I just would, I've asked Cassandra and David for some additional information to kind of understand this better, but instead of just doing 30% just across the board, or whatever increases, to be a little bit more thoughtful of it. And anyways, I'm gonna stop for now and might jump back in the queue, but thank you.
Thank you. Peter, I think you have your hand raised. And we're trying to take these as they go in order. I do know we have a couple of questions online too, but go ahead, Peter. Let me take your question.
Yeah, thank you. And I hate to make you keep jumping back and forth, but I'm going to move on to the proposed fee structure moving forward. I was just curious, do you have a functioning model at this point for how those use-based fees would be structured?
We have a couple working things of estimates, but again, it's a little hard to have a great model when we don't really have accurate numbers of what our volumes are. So we have some sample guesses, I would say, more than working models, but we'd be happy to share those with you.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to kind of echo Amber's earlier point, and I will submit these as formal comments as well, that, maybe we're a little cart before the horse, as someone who does, run a significant size contract lab business, in terms of budgets and estimates on what the fee structures would look like before regulations go to the board for approval. I think it might be prudent to have a working model that folks can then comment on. Are you going to differentiate by technological tiers? Are you going to differentiate by practices in terms of what the fee structures look like? Because I think it would be valuable to have a working model that people could comment back on prior to writing in the regulations. And I'll be, candid the same way Amber was. Those 3 points, while structurally potentially sound, seem pretty vague to go into board approval at this point without further definitions around some of the pieces of it. So to just commit to a use-based structure without having that, without a clear definition of regulatory purposes, what that means, without a discussion around how laboratories, this will be most pertinent to contract commercial labs, of those who are accredited, through reciprocity from a TNI state into ELAP, or fees going to be associated solely with FOAs on an ELAP scope, and then a lab has to try to differentiate within their LIMS or other sample tracking system work that's done for the same analysis for the same type that may not be necessarily subject to that, the administrative burden may be not insignificant, especially for larger multi-state private contract laboratories.
Yeah, we understand that is. I think the more we look at it, the more we realize how complex it is, which is kind of one of the driving factors of why we opted for kind of a quarterly data collection, at least at this point, is we realize how much we don't know. And so we really wanted the opportunity to start getting some data in a little bit faster. We had discussed maybe doing it annually, which may be something, if this carries through, that might be something we do in the long run. But we really needed kind of operating a little bit more in the dark than we want to be at this point. And so we figured if we opted for more of a quarterly data collection, it might give us some data faster so we can make better guesses and start really having conversations about what it would look like in functionality. And that, not being blind to the issue of also that there's a little bit of seasonality to the way our sample volumes are too, right? That there's going to be a slightly heavier workload generally during the summer than there is in the winter, just because of additional micro testing, because of temperature changes and whatnot. So, but we understand that. And so it's just really just an opportunity to start getting a much better idea. So hopefully, like you mentioned, we can have better conversations with more insight of what it might look like in practice versus kind of just guessing at things.
And 100%. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Peter, that your questions are really on the nose. A lot of what you asked are questions that we posed to the fee working group that we met with last month and got their thoughts and initial recommendations on how to address things like that. We do have 2 working models that we showed to them during that meeting. We're not the first state to do this. New York already does it. So we are fortunate to be able to work off of what's working for them already. And so that, is a really helpful place for us to start and for people to be able to see, what's, working in other parts of the industry.
Yeah, and to be clear, my position on this is really, it's not necessarily direct opposition to the structure and the model, as you mentioned, New York, and I think New Jersey might do it too. There are states that have use fee-based models that are out there. I think my biggest point is just, going to the board on September 19th to ask for, or 20th, I can't remember which date the number is, to ask for an adoption of this sort of almost theoretical new structure and to have that written into ELAP regs. Maybe it's a little premature at this point in time before we do have a chance to work some of the details around that out. I would hate for something, to Amber's point, for something to be written and then for us to have to be held accountable for it without fully fleshing out all the implications. And again, like, run a relatively large contract lab, but there are some real, 30, 40, 50,000 sample a month labs that are out there that are doing work throughout the country. And that could present a significant burden to them in terms of sort of tracking without having a model, without having a clear understanding of what regulatory sample definitions are, so that they may require further LIMS programming, so on and so forth. So maybe my overriding comment is maybe it's just a little early to have this go to board for consideration.
I hear you. I just want to make also clear that we are just proposing this data collection begin next year. We're not proposing a new fee structure based on that right now. We have to do this preliminary step of understanding what the labs are doing before we can, get a real working model out there for folks to comment on. So if we did push that off, then we're looking at even another additional year before getting a volume-based structure in place. And the board's direction to us, frankly, was to do it this year, have a volume-based structure in place 23, 24. And so we are going to them and saying, we couldn't do it as fast as you told us to do it because we don't have this infrastructure right now. And that is, a challenge, and for them, for us, and for the small labs particularly, if we are, because we would just continue to raise fees based on a flat approach, theoretically, like this during the interim until we could get a new structure in place. So not out of the realm of possibilities, but it does come with, impacts.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to get to, we have an email question, correct, Stephanie? And I'll go ahead and read the question here. It's from Catherine Chang from Eurofins Eden Analytical. And so these two questions are for program, Caitlin and Jen. Question one, can you define total numbers of tests per method? Does it mean the number of analyte results reported per method or number of analysts per method? For example, if 20 analytes were reported for EPA 524.2 analysis, is it counted as 20 tests or one test? So that's
sure,
the first question.
I'll take that one. Yeah, it's just the number of tests, so not the number of analytes. So, you know, if you ran 5 samples for, I think she mentioned 524.2, no matter how many analytes you reported from running that method, it would just count as one test. That's kind of what the data we're looking at right now.
Okay. And then question number 2 was, can you define what are considered as regulatory purposes? We would like to have a checklist or some guidance to ask the clients what they're reporting the data for, so we can determine whether it is a regulatory purpose or purposes.
Right. So generally be like permit holders have like specifically laid out in their permits what's required for testing, how many samples per month of what variety. So just specifically the tests that are required under those permits, how many of those?
Thank you.
Kate, you're muted.
Or I just was adding, or any sort of order or law by a state regulatory agency that requires analysis.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll go back to Amber. You have your hand up.
Yeah, excellent questions by the commercial laboratory community. And it goes to the point on the potential double accounting on what tests the lab's doing. And then as the responsible authority, as a public agency, we review the tests and then we're reporting them as well. So we're not running them, but that could be a source of confusion, which I think speaks to the point of clear and concise methodologies prior to actually implementing the volume-based system. I was able to kind of get some feedback from small labs as well, who said that this would be a very burdensome requirement as well. So to your point, Caitlin, of trying to protect small labs and this fee structure, just trying to make sure that what we lay out is, is still workable and doable and does not further increase, lower productivity due to administrative burden. So that's just my one point on there. And then also, I just wanted to, this is probably a question for Darren. Have you all performed that base workload analysis for the ELAP program? And is, because I obviously we wouldn't want to put you in some type of legal, position, but it would be helpful to kind of go in a finer detail on, the macro base workload analysis and then the various programs.
It was done some time ago. I think Caitlin actually knows more about it than I do on what we've done in the past, but we do monitor that to see where our workload's at. And it is the same. I don't recall off the top of my head how much we're under on our staffing, but we are still theoretically understaffed compared to what the work we're doing, but we are monitoring the changes over time, like you say, like was reported on the third-party assessors and stuff like that, to try to see how that's going to work out so that we can redo everything and understand where that workload comes from.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll work with Caitlin to maybe get a better understanding of what that is. I know what questions will be asked of me of my board. And so just trying to make sure that we have the right answers. So thank you for entertaining me with all the details.
I did want to say too, Amber, that, we recognize that this is going to be new for some laboratories. We do expect that laboratories understand know where the data they produce is going. That's something that we've expected for some time, but many laboratories don't always, like, those dots are not always connected. But just recognizing that that's not happening in every laboratory, we understand absolutely that there's going to be labs who need help doing this and are planning, to release compliance assistance with this new direction. So we're not just going to put it out there and expect everybody to figure it out on their own. There's going to be plenty of guidance from us to help folks, answer the questions that you were asking. And and be able to quantify the work that they're doing essentially.
I think it's an excellent conversation starter, but we'll definitely be still reiterating the point to the board to request that there'd be structured meetings with LTAC to have a methodology prior to adoption. So thank you.
Hi, Debbie, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I've got a follow-up question. Sorry, I'm kind of gonna stay on the track of where I was before. So I still am a little bit confused on the regulatory fees. So last year should have the loss in revenue due to third-party assessors that was anticipated versus actually had. We still had, it seems like if it was already in there, that would already be taken into account. But so we would still expect 37 next year, maybe a little bit less because the loss in labs. It seems like that 3,000 is really conservative because we've already seen those losses. And you said that really, from what you've told me, it seems like, you know, maybe we'd have a 6 to 10%, not a 20% change in income, in revenue income from the regulatory fees from losses of labs. And so I'm wondering how conservative that number is. And then Darren, kind of going to your point is yes, there might not be filling that, but are we being so conservative on the loss and regulatory fees that we're inadvertently or you know, that we're driving up what we need for an increase? So for example, if we had picked something maybe a little bit less, like 3 or 4% less, and so you're at 36, actually it'll be 3.6 million, but 3.6 million instead of 3 million, we'd be seeing a lot less reduction. Plus, we probably would still be seeing some of those savings should those positions not be filled. So do you guys understand where I was going with that, and maybe could respond to that?
I think I might understand what you're asking. I think, are you asking, Debbie, if we're oversetting the fees, like if we're setting based on the reduction that we're expecting?
Yeah, I'm looking at the regulatory
over collect.
Well, no. I'm not saying that you're trying to intentionally over collect. I'm not, please know that that's not trying to, but I'm wondering if you're being ultra conservative with what you're saying with collection of regulatory fees. So from going to the 3.7 million down to the 3 million in the regulatory fees revenue, considering that in 22-23, you already saw the reductions of on-site assessments. You said that there was only going to be, you expected an uptick, but that uptick, you were kind of more in that 2 to 3% versus the 20% difference that we're seeing between the 3.7 and the 3. And then just a small FOA. So I'm wondering if that 3 million isn't super conservative because you've already experienced some of those changes in the regulatory fees, and it's reflected, and it was closer to the 3 point, I shouldn't say it was closer. The projected, which David, I think it's pretty darn close, right, is that 3.7 for last fiscal year.
So I think I understand. And David, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3 million projected regulatory fees, that projection is based off of the 22-23 numbers. Is that correct?
Well, yes, and it's also based on what we're projecting with additional labs continuing to drop off, right? Okay. So with labs dropping off now, Debbie's stating that we've already seen a shift of labs dropping off, right? And that's already kind of included on our 22-23 labs. So potentially, should the drop be less than kind of what we're showing right now?
Yeah. I would only counter, Debbie, if you look, the part that scares me more is the 2.4% fund reserve. That is completely inadequate. So it's balancing the component between the two. At that fund reserve level on our projection, if we go under, we're going to under fund ourselves, and that has all kinds of consequences for us as managers when we underfund a program. A fund this size should have a reserve of about 12 to 15% as a standard. And so in sympathy of the 30% increase, we're really cutting it way too close for comfort on the fund reserve component as well.
Okay, but and I understand that, but you're also assuming that you're going to be at full staff, full year, full everything, and you ended with a 26% fund balance, a 26% fund balance. So it's unlikely that you're going to hit that full 4.3 million this year, where you're at. Yeah. So there's this balance, and I guess where I'm trying to go is in looking at this, because I understand what you said. You don't want to, you're by law required to do that, but I think given the information that you gave me, it's that going from 3.7 down to 3 million seems ultra conservative, considering the loss was already experienced in some ways, but then it's more like a 3, maybe 4% loss, not a 20% loss. And so, and you're fully staffed. So I mean, just, it seems like there's room to still keep the fund healthy without being way up at the 30% is what I'm saying.
I understand what you're trying to say. Unfortunately, kind of the rules that are given to us on how to set this, we do have to assume full staffing. In fact, I would be in huge trouble if we got through the year and we were unable to meet our numbers on our staffing, and then to on purpose then hold positions unfunded. Gets me into even deeper trouble as far as subverting the budgetary rules associated with us. So I understand your point, but it's a tough balancing that we have to try to do on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that where and I understand what you're saying, and I'm not saying, oh, you change your state operations, but I do think that the regulatory fees saying that you're going to have a 20% loss when all the other indicators sound like it's only a 2 or 3% loss compared to the last year, that could really balance the numbers differently. And I understand what you're saying about the fund reserve, but looking at the 26% last year, knowing that, by the time you get someone hired, you're not going to get there. I think that's it really is pushing that 30% probably a lot higher than it needs to be.
Yeah.
So
I understand.
And just to add to your point, Debbie, regarding the 26%, keep in mind there's two drivers to that 26%. One, of course, is an additional $267,000 from a fines and penalty that came in, which, there's no guarantees we're going to get another fines and penalties moving forward, right? And then as we've kind of had these discussions, also what's driving that is because of us being able to put measures in place for savings for expenditures, right? And so those two drivers are driving of what we ended with $867,000. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be proposing an option right now, which really is that money is offsetting the 56% that was calculated back in May or in our June meeting, right? And so and as Darren said, I mean, the fund reserve is a little out the door right now. We're just trying to keep a positive fund reserve right now so we can kind of keep this in the positive, work with finance, and get us a sustainable funding or fee structure in place in the future that we can move forward with.
Yeah, I understand that, but you've heard my comments. I think that there's still some room where we don't have to be looking at 30%. So I'm just going to make that as a comment then. And thanks for answering this question.
Thank you. So I don't see any other additional questions at this time. maybe I can have Caitlin or Jen just kind of next steps regarding, before I move back into the board fee setting process, but maybe you guys can just touch basis on the next steps for the next ELAP meeting that's scheduled here in a few weeks, or comments. I'm sorry about the comments for the receiving the feedback.
Yeah, so we're asking the laboratory community to send any comments to our ELAP CA _comments at waterboards.ca.gov to that email address. And we're going to be looking at all of those and looking at the fee regulation language and the data reporting. And so we'll make any changes that come up and have good discussions about those, and we'll present those changes at the August 22nd LTAC meeting. So everyone's welcome to come watch and comment on them, on the changes there. And then from there, we'll be presenting our suggestions at the board meeting in September.
Thank you, Jen. And so as kind of next steps kind of move into September 19th is our board meeting where staff takes a item to the board for consideration and adoption. Prior to this meeting, scheduled 10 days before the meeting, which puts us around September 9th, is that the agenda item and staff report are released to the public, which allows, of course, for public comment. And it, again, allows the board to read the comments and to, of course, come up with an informed decision at that point. And staff at this point start to get into the discussions with the board members on briefings, and so we'll kind of internal kind of start having the briefings, and of course all the information that we've heard from this meeting, and of course in the next few weeks, kind of what we hear, we use that to inform the board. So we appreciate all the feedback that we get, and we'll take that information, of course, pass that along to our board members. If of course adopted in September, of course it goes over to Office of Administrative Law, and it's about a month after this. We're probably looking at mid to end of October, which the changes to the regs would go into place. So I do see Amber, you have your hand up, and then I was going to pass it on to John Russell after this. So Amber, you have a final comment?
Just a question. Under the Office of Administrative Law, does it actually require any type of economic analysis associated with this? Because from our perspective, it would be an increase of time from our staff to actually compile this information. So is that a required analysis? I just remember back on what Caitlin's point earlier about their economic analysis on their fees previously and the assumptions made versus the reality. So I'm just trying to kind of resolve that and understand if that economic analysis would be required to go to AOAL.
Amber, this is Kim Niemeyer. For the emergency regulations, no, it's not required.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So I was just going to pass this to John Russell if you have any closing comments.
No, once again, thank you for joining us today. I know this was a good conversation, and we have more conversation to do in the future as we phase some of these changes in. But like I said, if you have any questions that come up or things that you've thought about after this meeting, don't hesitate to contact David or myself or Cassandra. And we can work with you individually to get you the information you need. Thank you, David.
So thank you, John. Again, I want to just thank all the internal staff that helped put this on. Definitely program staff. Can't do it without you and your involvement. And of course, the stakeholders, everyone, I want to just thank you guys for taking time out of your day. We definitely appreciate the feedback. We look at this as just kind of being a whole process where we want the stakeholders involved in the process, of course, program staff, and of course, us fee staff there in Division of Administrative Services. So we all kind of work together to kind of help get this done. So we appreciate it, appreciate everyone's time, and we'll be signing off and we'll be talking soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.